in a wider context, because the entire system of life on Earth is under profound threat, and all of these things are connected. It's not just global warming by itself, and I'll try and go through a number of things in relation to that. But I want to start off with some questions. I would like to know from you, which is your position? Which seems closest to your view? Do you, in relation to global warming caused by human activity, so everything, power, travel, the lot, do you think that global warming caused by human activity is a myth? It's really all just the weather changing? Are you basically unsure? You've heard all these different views and you really, really don't know? Or are you concerned about the issue? You think, well, maybe there's something needs to be done, but hey, there are other priorities. It's not that important. Or are you fundamentally worried and see this as a really top priority? Now, don't feel you need to indicate, but I'd be interested to know where you are. So whose view is A? Who thinks it's all a big myth? Sorry? No, who amongst you? Yeah, so actually, even Trump is conceding these days, actually, even on some fronts. But amongst you, so it'd be a bit unusual to turn up to a talk like this and be an A. Who is in category B? Unsure, and that's why you've come along. You want to find out more. No Bs, okay. Who is C? You're concerned, think it's important, but it's not that important, and the other priorities. Okay, so a few more. And who are Ds? This is frightening and a top priority. Okay, so the strong majority. That's very interesting. For what it's worth, I'm a D. I used to be a C until I educated myself and went, man, this is frightening. Okay, so it's a D. And I think that by the end I might persuade you that it is a D. So another question for you. What percentage of the scientific research concludes that global warming is mostly caused by human activity, power, transportation, and so on? So do you think it's a very small percentage of the research, a minority of the research, medium, most, or nearly all of the research? So who of you thinks only a few, A, it's only a minority of scientists think this? No, so not A's. Who think is B, that it's a minority view among scientists? None. Who thinks it's C, somewhere between 40 and 80? So there's quite a lot of disagreement. Okay, so we've got 2, 3, 4, and 4. Yeah. And who thinks it's a really large proportion, but still quite a few on this, that are not persuaded? Okay, quite a few. And who thinks it's either virtually all or actually all climate science research? A fair number. So here's the actual figure. 99.99%, and in other words, out of many thousands of research papers, a total of 4 denied and challenged the idea. I actually wrote to these scientists and said, please tell me more. None of them wrote back. What little research there has been done that concluded that this is all wrong has been shown to be invalid. So the actual figure is 100% of the research concludes that it's that. One more for you. According to the scientific research, what percentage of global warming is caused by human activity? Is it hardly any, A? Is it a minority of it, B? Is it somewhere around half, C? Is it really most of it, maybe up to even 94%, or is it 95% plus? So who thinks it's A? Humans cause a tiny bit of global warming. No one. Who thinks it's B, up to 39%? No one. Who thinks it's C, between 40 and 80%? Got a couple, few. Another one. Who thinks it's D, right up to 94%, but there's some that might be natural. Okay, so quite a lot of views. And who thinks it's 95% or above? So a fair number. So actually quite a widespread. So this is the actual figure. Between 92% and 123% of global warming is caused by human activity. Now, I'm sure there's a couple of you going, more than 100%? How does that work? Okay, but so that's because quite a lot of the research concludes there may be a cooling that without human activity that would be underway. And so there's a range of values established by the scientists. So here is a good summary of where we actually are. 100% of valid scientific research says global warming is at least 92% caused by human activity. So to conclude, we are completely sure that it's us that is causing this issue. Human beings struggle to survive longer and longer number of days of these periods of dangerous heat and more extreme weather, not just hotter weather, but much more extreme weather, extremes of hot and cold. And what you get is patterns where the weather systems are extreme and static. So you don't just get extremely heavy rain, you get it continuing, or heat continuing because the weather systems get distorted and then get locked in. Of course, considering where we are, you'll be very aware of more frequent, longer, and more intense droughts. Now, obviously, there can be variations that are not driven by global warming, but the overall pattern is exactly as predicted. And the degree of drought now and difficulty of accessing water is very extreme, already on 1 degree C. So India is having, throughout the country, is having a water crisis right now. But it's not just dry in terms of flooding. Flooding is already happening. So sea level's already risen a little. There's a part of North Wales in the UK where it's just impossible to maintain the town anymore. They're engaged in a planned retreat of the entire town. Everyone is having to move out. No one can sell the property they have. I did have one person came from Florida, said, well, if Florida starts to go underwater, I'll just sell my property. I'm not sure who to, a scuba diver, a dolphin. I'm not entirely sure who's going to buy it. We have a world where the major cities are by the sea. And the sea level rises are heading for could be a number of meters. And I've just come back from Djibouti. And if you see Djibouti, all the harbour and so on, the water level, they're about a metre, everything's about a metre above the water. So building sea defences would be a massive issue. And in relation to the kind of flooding you talk about, so this was 3rd of July. This is just one of many things I plucked out of the newspapers. 3rd of July, 1 million Japanese evacuated, 1 million Japanese IDPs from flooding. Now, I wonder how many of you has anyone even heard of that? I wonder how many people knew about the 1 million displaced Japanese just in the last week? It's become so normal that something as crazy as 1 million Japanese IDPs doesn't even get mentioned in the news. Right? But it has to be seen as part of a wider problem. So, because it's going to connect to global warming, that its causes are also having other consequences. We're living in an extremely polluted world, right? Indoor and outdoor from the way we live. It kills 10%, it causes 10% of the premature deaths globally. In the UK alone, so it's meant to be a cleaner place, kills 40,000 people a year in the UK. Air pollution in the UK is at officially illegal levels. And this is costing societies in the world massively every year. Another aspect of the system we have is plastic everywhere. This will, I'm sure, look familiar to you, right? And it's not just here, it's everywhere else. And this is part of our normal. This will have to stop, right? The way that we do these things, single-use plastics, that has to come to an end. These plastics are getting absolutely everywhere. They've found them in the most remote mountains. They've found them in the deepest trenches on Earth. The entire world, your body is pervaded by microparticles of plastic. This is pervading. There's the annual amount of plastic per European person is about 50 kilos of plastic each year. This is absolutely unsustainable. All of this is coming together and killing the seas. So the sea is literally dying due to lack of oxygen. Because as you have fertilizer runoffs, and other materials going into the sea, you get algae blooms. The algae blooms poison the water, and the fish die in to a massive degree. These red areas are basically areas of the sea that in a lot of respects are dead, and this is massive areas where the oxygen is disappearing. And what you can get, and so one of the problems they're having, for instance, along the American coastline is these algae blooms are like 20, 30 miles long, and they're so enormous that they're shutting down these holiday resorts because these are toxic algae all coming up onto the beaches. The scale of it is proving unmanageable. You can see this as well. There's something underlying all this. The disappearance of the butterflies, the disappearance of invertebrates. We're in a process of mass extinction. There are areas where 98% of the insects have disappeared. Many studies around the world are finding areas where they compare them over periods of years, and again, that's the kind of figures you come up with. A lot of people think, well, maybe the animals that we love, like the giraffes and so on, and the gorillas, at least we'll probably be looking after them because they get all the conservation efforts. That's not true. All of the ones that we love, the polar bears, tigers, elephants, gorillas, cheetahs, leopards, lions, giraffes, they're all heading rapidly for extinction in the wild. There's every reason to think that very soon, 20, 30 years, there will be none left in the world due to poaching, due to hunting, due to habitat loss. They're lost like 50, 60% of their range. They're all going. So bear in mind, we're already 1 degree warmer. 2 degrees of warming will be much worse than 1.5 degrees C, which is why we had this urgent report from the IPCC saying, look, this really is a big difference, and we have got to do everything we can to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, because once this spins completely out of control, you can be talking about radical collapses in food chains, radical collapses in ice, producing rapid rises in sea levels that will be completely unmanageable. I mean, there are many subtleties going on. So, for example, in France, there are nuclear power stations that rely on rivers that have had to cut their output by half and 2/3 because the rivers don't flow anymore, and they need the rivers to cool the nuclear power plants. So the costs are seriously rising. So to get to 1.5 degrees C, we have to cut carbon emissions 45% by 2030. So that's 11 years from now. The world has to get rid of 45% of its carbon production, and it's got to get to 0 by 2050. Now that's an absolutely massive challenge. But anyway, the world is not meeting that challenge. Where we are actually heading is emissions are still rising. We're heading for 4 degrees of warming. And a lot of the research has been focused on what 2 degrees would look like, what 1.5 degrees would look like, and how absolutely awful 2 degrees would be, and the desperate importance of getting to 1.5 degrees. And even then, that would be pretty awful. And so now people are thinking about, actually, we have to plan for 4 degrees. And a lot of the research is saying this may simply be a lot of the scientists are now saying this may simply be beyond human organizing capacity. The entire world system that we know is under threat. So give you an example. So fossil fuels, oil, coal, and gas, those figures need to look like they're going like this. They need to be dropping at that angle now. They're actually going up. More oil, more coal, more gas. And sure, renewables are going up. I mean, impressively, but absolutely dwarfed. And furthermore, it is simply part of the massive system that's feeding more consumption, okay? So we are not only not addressing the picture, we're going in precisely the opposite direction. So I've set a lot of this out, and it's very common at these kind of talks that I've given you fairly standard stuff about what's going on. But I think what I want to do is talk a little bit about why we're going down this road. And it connects a little bit more to my own domain as a professor of politics. So, for example, when the company that made the plastic bottle made it, the fact that this is going to end up in damaging microplastics, the company is not charged that as a cost, right? So as an externality, it's out. And this is a fundamental problem. I talk about, I'm going to throw something out. There is no out. We're all part of that system of life. So when you throw it, it comes back. It's a boomerang. Everything is a boomerang. Everything comes back. Everything has a cost. And we may choose not to count that cost ourselves, but the biosphere, the environment, doesn't know not to count it. Do you know what it's a bit like? It's a bit like secret eating, right? Where you say, I don't understand. I'm still putting on weight, but I'm only having salad. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, you sneak downstairs and you empty the fridge and you eat all that cake and you have it in your bag. Your body doesn't know not to count those calories. Right? It's exactly the same. There is no out. There's no external. There's no externalities. And so if you have a system that financially rewards the destruction that we have, this is what you get. It's simply guaranteed and predictable. If the plastic bottle company is not made to pay for the damage that this will cause, and if I'm not paying a tax to buy this, then of course they're going to do it. They're going to be economically rational within our system. And it's the difference between individual rationality, it's rational for them to make the money, and collective, altogether, irrationality. And that's the system that we're currently in. So that's the first element of it. Economic growth. Now, bearing in mind the already terrible consequences of where we are, this system, this rocket, is still heading straight up. The global economy is projected to, by 2050, and 2050 is an interesting date, because that's the same one that we're meant to be zero carbon. Right? So by 2050, zero carbon, the global economy is going to be more than double in size. Okay. How do those two things even remotely make sense together? So what we have to understand is, what system are we in now? Because whatever that system is, that's the one that's producing the consequences that we have. And the problem with a lot of the discussion of things like global warming is that it's far too technical. It's far too scientific. It's far too, if only we make this new solar panel, then all our problems will be solved. When actually you've got to think about the system that's driving all of this, the actual cause. And it's, first of all, it's consumer capitalism. So hunter-gatherers, nomads, you're all nomads, you'll know all about this. It's where, history is nomad, and some of you present on, to agriculture, to trading with vessels, through to the beginning of industry, really the 1850s, and now consumer capitalism. As we have changed system, the consequences have got bigger. So what we have to understand is that we're in a particular version of capitalism called consumer capitalism. Now, at the heart of consumer capitalism is a logic. And it says that an item, like this pen, this light pen, it has no use value. Right? In other words, what you use it for this system doesn't care. What it has is an exchange value. In other words, for capitalism, this is functional in a transaction because that's what enables profit. So it's that you sell it, someone makes a profit. Yeah? As soon as you have this, it is useless to consumer capitalism because no one's making any profit. Where's the economic growth? Now, there's a little hint at the poison at the heart of the system. You don't want to buy a second one. You just want one that works, and preferably one that lasts a long time. But you need to be encouraged to buy another one, not because you need another one, but because the system of consumer capitalism requires things to circulate for more money to be made. So one of the key ways that you do that is fashion. Right? Sorry, ladies. Sorry, some of the gents. Not me, I'm unfashionable. I've given up on that. Which is, what you do is you say, oh, you've got this phone. Ah, but it doesn't flip up. Right? You go, oh, it doesn't flip up. Gah, get rid of it. Right? And everyone replaces their phone. And then they say, well, the trouble is everyone's got a phone that they like. Great for you, useless for the logic of consumer capitalism. So they go, flip phones, that's really embarrassing. My one is a big one, then my one's a small one, then my one does this, then my one does that. Right? And actually, it's necessary for the logic of this system. So we don't exist as human beings in value for ourselves. We are merely machines for generating consumption and production because that's where the profit comes from. So until we address consumer capitalism and the culture that we feel, because if I had the wrong clothes, if I had like long collars, I would feel embarrassed at having it. I'd want to buy a replacement shirt. I find it difficult to go, this is a terrible looking shirt, because that's not what people wear these days. So that's fundamental. And then connecting back to what I said earlier about why is it that people think that there's any doubt about the science. There's a well-documented reason. Big companies have known the truth about poisoning the world, about global warming. They've known it for decades. And they said, this is a threat to our business model. So what we need to do is create a myth that says the science is uncertain. Oh, there's a lot of debate. Oh, there's a lot of disagreement. As they put it, doubt is our product. They said, we're going to push doubt. And they bought politicians, and right to this present day, they buy politicians with vast amounts of money. They buy some corrupt scientists who produce garbage so-called research that then gets rejected, which is why still 100% of the valid science says global warming is true. They fight regulation, and the idea is they don't want to pay the costs. They make you pay the costs in terms of early death, in terms of the harshness of your living, in terms of the droughts, the floods, all of the problems that the world is facing, all so they can continue to make their money out of circulation of goods, not because they're helping you. And the other thing is, when people talk about economic rationality and the efficiency of the market system, it's really important to know this is subsidized. Right? These aren't brave companies that are doing these wonderful things. Government subsidy to the fossil fuel firms are absolutely enormous. That's the only reason they're not all totally out of business already, and it's the reason why renewables haven't taken over the world already, is because they're so heavily subsidized. And another subsidy is when the systems that they generate make you ill, you pay for it. Not them, you pay for it. So all of the things, all of the consequences, you're picking up the tab and they aren't. Another aspect of this is unjust inequality. So if you look at who's generating the carbon emissions, right? I am in this top 10%. It's not everyone in the world, it's not the number of people in the world that's causing this problem. If you got rid of half of humanity, if you got rid of 3.5 billion people, that would get rid of 10% of global warming emissions. So see this idea that it's too many people on the Earth, implying that it's all these poor people and they're messing up the Earth. Just get rid of the 10% of the rich people. Get rid of people like me, right? If we're talking about who to get rid of, so it's the rich. It's us. We're the ones. Almost certainly, most people in this room are from a relatively privileged background. We are the problem. What our lifestyles, our behavior is what's driving this situation. So, on to what we can do to finish off. The first thing is, it is an emergency, so we've got to start acting like it's one. And it feels very weird, I don't know about you, but it feels very weird to me giving these talks, because there's a bit of me that's frankly terrified. The more I know, the more terrified I am. I have 2 children, right? One of them's 23, one of them's 23, one's just qualified as a teacher, one's just qualified to design computer games. And they look to me and they say, listen, we know what's going on, and I don't know what to say to them. We're actually heading for catastrophe. I can't protect them. Never mind, I can't protect myself. Never mind about me. I don't care. Listen, frankly, I'm not going to be around that much longer. But they're liable to be around much longer. And our generation, as older people, we have failed them. Right? And they're coming through and going, is this the world you've given us? Is this it? Is this what we've got to handle? Really? And then they will see these people not really dealing with the problem, sort of talking about it and not really facing it. It's kind of embarrassing. And what's really striking in my own field, where I'll just give you an illustration. Some people I know are putting in for funding to do research on this, and it will include a massive amount of air travel. I just said, if we know what we understand, and we're engaged in a massive amount of air travel, how can we even talk about teaching anyone else? What it means is, even though we understand deeply, we can't change. So we have to start changing. But it's not just our personal responsibility. Because when you just feel guilty yourself, you're also a victim of a system that has put you where you are. You didn't choose to do this to the earth and your children. So here's what we need to aim for. Now, bearing in mind that we know what the main causes are: consumer capitalism, unjust inequality. So first of all, we have to end all fossil fuel investment now. If you are a petroleum engineer and a young person being trained as a petroleum engineer, your job should be how to cap the fields, how to shut them down, and how to make sure they don't pollute anymore. And that's the beginning and ending of your job. It's absolutely irresponsible and wrong to be opening up new gas and oil fields. You need to shut it all down as soon as possible. Now, one of the things you talk about justice, you say, well, the rich world benefited from our oil and gas. Why can't Somaliland? Okay, I'll give you some reasons. So the first is that if you go down this road, first of all, there's something called the resource curse. And there's every evidence that systems with weaker governance get more conflict, more poverty, more repression, as all the vultures come in to get the money. Venezuela, Nigeria, you may think Dubai, it won't be Dubai here, right? You will suffer the consequences, so you won't even get money. The second thing is, you are reinforcing the behavior that's destroying your countryside, your way of life. So if you go down that road, you're basically saying that's all right for them to engage in bigger behaviors that will destroy you. So you won't get the money, you will get destroyed. There's no reason to think anything else, unfortunately. And speaking, but I'm Scottish, and I'm in favour of my country becoming independent, and it used to be, we say, well, we have the oil money. That's not good enough now. And now most of Scotland's energy is from wind, wave, solar, hydro. So even an oil-rich country like Scotland, you might know that in the UK, in 6 years' time, it's going to be illegal to install a gas boiler. Right? So if you're investing in gas, old-fashioned technology, you're going backwards. Right? What you're doing won't even be legal in the UK in just 6 years' time. It's called stranded assets, where you invest in something that turns out to be a complete waste of money. So you are very likely to be heading down that road. So what you need to do is stop subsidizing the polluters. They'll all go out of business anyway. You need to make the polluters pay, work out what the costs they are, make them pay for the damage, and pay compensation for the things that they know they've done. You have to subsidize and deploy massively systems across housing, employment, energy that will fit the situation. We need to, even then, we need to try and take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. There's a lot of technologies being talked about. We can maybe talk about them some more, but they're not very good. The best we can do is reforestation, stop deforestation and reforest, but understand that that is no substitute for a massive decarbonisation. Biodiversity. I'm actually, just to be clear, more worried about biodiversity collapse than I am about global warming. I've talked to many leading biodiversity scientists at the University of Bristol, and I spent a lot of time with them saying, am I right to be more concerned about the biodiversity crisis even than global warming? I know they're interconnected, and they're saying yes, because that is, once you lose the microbes and the insects and the birds and the fish and the invertebrates, then you lose the entire food chain. So it's potentially completely catastrophic. So we have to stop and reverse the habitat destruction, change how we produce food, get rid of the pollution, the fertilizers, the pesticides, the insecticides, that all has to go. We have to take a fundamentally different approach to biodiversity. So then down to the, I'm almost finished, down to the individuals. So I've been reflecting on this. Often we say, what are the most effective things that the individuals can do? Usually we get this side of the thing. And this is true, so these are the most important ones. Having fewer children, I'm not getting rid of any of my own, and maybe not having more, but the number of, because if you think about it, the resources and the emissions from more children are damaging, especially from wealthier people. Fly less, drive less, green energy, less meat, home energy efficiency, use less, waste less. This is all really familiar, right? Those are things that you can do. That's really inadequate, though, because it doesn't address the main causes of why we're here. It's not your individual failures that you should feel guilty about. It's this. Learn the truth about how bad the problem is, what we can do about it, and why it's happening. Remember those main causes. They're not your individual failing. So we have to demand that politicians, business, and media tell the truth about what's happening, because you rarely see it. It's amazing how little this is actually said. And that means you need fair emergency action now. And I said fair emergency action. So if people here in this country are suffering the consequences of climate change, then they should be supported. And I'll come back to that. And also, we have to demand adaptation, which I'll come on to, which is really my last part. Global warming is here. It's already happening. It is going to get much worse. Now, bearing in mind that fact, the lack of investment in adaptation is absolutely terrifying. So even in the UK, there's just been a big report just come out saying that the UK is completely failing on 24 out of 25 areas necessary to survive even 2 degrees. So the UK is nowhere on this. Right? So we have to think about how to adapt. In particular, in terms of climate justice, the poorest are the least responsible for how we got there. It's us rich people. So just to finish off, people often talk about a deadline. So this is my last slide. People often talk about a deadline, that what happens when we get to 2050, or what happens if we pass a certain threshold. There can be tipping points and so on, but fundamentally, everything that we do makes the outcome a little less awful. And so nothing is wasted. And your individual efforts are all part of a wider effort. It's not an either-or between the collective and the individual. They all come together. I haven't really talked that much about here directly, because in a sense you're more the experts on here, but I'm sure we can talk through some of the connections. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you.